Righto, here we go. Tom Boyd joins us on BackChat, powered by Fleet Network this year. Very excited to have this man in the house for one of our November features. Thomas, nice to meet you, mate, and lovely to have you on the show.
Oh, it's great to be on. It's this is kind of like the most crazy time of year in my career, almost really around this trade period, and there's never a better time to see in the souls of these media personalities who spend time commentating on the game at a trade period, and how bad everyone is and how much clubs are wasting money. And I've been all through it, so it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I think we should just address something straight off the bat. Tom is out the front of the sun currently. The sun is parked right out front of your window, so you're glowing if you're watching on YouTube.
There's actually I actually thought of one fix that we didn't try, which is cleaning the camera. Because that's what it is. And now that we haven't tried it, should we try it?
You can give it a little rub. Give it a rub while we're going. I think
give it a little. This actually might fix it, and then all of a sudden it'll all go into focus. Wait a minute. Is that better?
No, you're even brighter, which is great. It's fine. We're rolling with it. You're absolutely illuminated right now. Tom, I know you're a big BackChat fan, but just in case you're not, we asked the same question to every guest we ever have on this podcast. We start with the same thing, and it's based around the sporting achievements of our guests. Now, we know, you've done pretty much the greatest thing in AFL land, which is won an AFL Premiership. You're number one drafter. You played across 2 clubs. You've done a lot of great things in the AFL and then some great things post-career as well. But I want to say, just for this moment, I don't care. I want to hear your greatest sporting achievement not on the football field. I want to know what you can do without a footy in your hands. Now, my co-host, Dan, 5 for 16.
5 for 16 in a grand final, taking wickets. Not winning grand finals, but taking wickets. Pretty good effort.
Yeah, I'm an under-9s 80-metre hurdle champion. We've had many examples across the line. What have you got for us, mate? What can you do off the footy field?
Second in the under-16 state mixed netball schools championship. So that was strong. That was actually, funnily enough, that was with my best mate, Dan McStay, who was obviously playing at Collingwood this year, who ended up actually going to play for Australia, would you believe, as the goal defence, young Daniel. I don't know how much he shares that, so I'll just blow his cover.
Did he really?
Yeah, he was he was incredible. It's like he had the same athletic skill set, I suppose, that he has now. He's long and fast and athletic. So that was one. We came 4th in the club championships for basketball in the nationals in under 12s.
Wow.
So we went up to Darwin and lost to Dante and Ben Simmons and those boys who ended up, playing in the NBA and dating Kardashians. So yeah, probably those two. I mean, there was sort of a few different things along the way, but basketball and football was sort of my predominant. And then more recently, mixed netball grand final premiers in the with wife down here in Albert Park in the last little bit. And you wouldn't believe it, but I played against a guy in that who I later found out played for the New Zealand national team. He's 7'1". His name's Junior. Look him up. He is massive. And anyway, surely enough, we didn't beat them in the next season. But in the first one, we did all right when we were in Beagle.
I mean, Dan, you're a big-time mixed netballer.
Yeah, I got in too many heated arguments with Martha and Barbara, the referees, because I played so much footy as a kid, and you want to be physical, and anytime you touch the ball or bump someone slightly, they get call it a foul, and it's I don't know. How do you go playing a mixed sport with your wife? Because I think in past when me and my wife played on a mixed volleyball team, it wasn't good for the relationship.
Yeah, Anna, my wife, had a very clear mindset around how it was going to go. She said it's going to lead to 2 outcomes. The first would be we're going to get divorced, and the second would be we're going to have another baby. So one of the two. Fair to say neither has happened yet. I've been injured. I actually just had back surgery a couple of weeks ago on an old footy injury. So we're all good. There's no more children and no divorces on the agenda. So we'll just have to keep playing to get to one of those, I suppose.
Huge. Hunting for that national championship. Now, Todd, I do want to take you back a little bit and hear a bit about your upbringing. You're from a sporting family. I know your mum is from Denmark. I'm interested to hear how growing up was for you. Was it a sporting upbringing? Were you always good at sport, and was it something your family did a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of so Dad was the predominant sportsman in our household. My mum would love to tell you that she did things when we were kids, but ball sports weren't really her thing. So Dad was a big sort of local level cricketer, local level footballer. I think he got suspended either for life or for many, many games for playing basketball and thinking you could fight in basketball, which was sort of a worse version of your description of netball before. So yeah, he was the guy who sort of pushed me, and I've told people a few times his story. So I came into school like in my first year in prep as a relatively normal sized kid, but by the end of that first year, I'd grown 27 centimeters, and I was almost the biggest kid in the school.
Wow!
And so that helps to no end. Obviously, running through the ranks of basketball and football, I almost made the schoolboys team in under 12s. Played in the interleague sides the whole way through, started at the Rangers and under 14s, finished there at under 18s with a premiership. But I think the thing for me was, sport was such a big part, but my parents were also just hugely, hugely encouraging of me making sure that I did well at school. So I kind of got to a teetering point at, around 15 or 16 post the national championships with football when I captained Victoria, and we didn't do that well for that matter, nor did I do that well. And I just had to basically work out where I was going to go. And basketball is an incredibly unforgiving sport when it comes to time. Like, you have to dedicate the time to be there, and the coaches are all miserable. My guess is because many of them come back from overseas as disappointed or whatever, and they're all short, which makes no sense because why would you play basketball if you're not like 6'7"? And I got to that stage, and there's a really clear reason in my mind why I chose football. And I grew up at a place called Mullen Reserve, which is the local footy ground at Norwood in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And on the walls, you can imagine there's like the Premiership Cups, and there's the teams of the past who've won, and the flags and all that stuff. But there was this one photo on the wall, which always was the most important one to me. And it was this photo of a guy with a massive burly beard, black and white photo, holding a Premiership Cup above his head and getting 2 VBs poured on him.
Wow.
This is the pinnacle of sporting excellence from a very young age. And that photo was of my dad. So he captain coached the 1989 Division 3 Premiership in the AFL. So to follow in Dad's footsteps was the way to go for me. Always loved football, I think, from a culture point of view more than basketball. And chose the right direction.
You should have recreated. Well, I don't know. Maybe you did recreate that photo with the AFL Cup, the beard. Yeah, okay, that's fair. And you can't disrespect the old man like that. Say, "Oh, look, I got a photo like this," because your dad would have said, "There's no beard there, son." Divvy 3, Croydon type areas. That's very good. So you mentioned it off the top. It is sort of trade period and leading towards the draft period. You had some great years of junior footy. You end up being a number 1 draft pick. How do you reflect on that time of, well, your life? Everyone else is externally looking in at what you sort of went through, but you know what it's like. What's that? I'm assuming pressure. What's that time like as a young man, trying to make it in the big stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really different depending on what you're like. I mean, in the last 5 or 6, or it's almost 10 years, I think now, since I got drafted, there's been a bunch of number 1 picks, and to varying degrees of success. And I think the way that you approach football as a whole, is completely different dependent on your personality. So for me, one of the things that was a cornerstone of my success as an 18-year-old was that I was absolutely putting all of my effort into school as much as I could around football. And I remember, having just incredibly high standards for myself at that age in terms of not just preparation, not just commitment, not just, execution, but I had to have the outcome on the field that I was getting used to. And to be frank, that outcome was in 2012 when we played in the TAC Cup as a junior, as a bottom age player. I won the league goal kicking for a team that won 3 games for the year. And the year after that, I started the season averaging a tick under 5 goals a game against the best players in the country, against best players in the state through the sort of national carnival and also the TAC Cup. And that was what I expected of myself. And I remember it like it was yesterday. There was this, we played this game against Bendigo, I think, at Box Hill City Oval. And I had kicked 3 goals 8 and had like 23 disposals or something like that.
Wow.
And I came off the ground and I looked in the paper, as you do, just to see, how you went, as you check whether you got in the best or not. And I looked at the best for Bendigo, and the best on player was the guy who played on me. And I turned around to Dad. I said, if you think a fullback should get best on for having 11 shots at goal, you're nuts. And Dad, being an adult at the time and having a bit more perspective than me, said, Tom, they're not ranking him as a backman. They're ranking, him compared to you. It's the first time you've been kept under 5 goals for the year. And that addiction that I had to just being not only the best player on the ground, but a dominant player on the ground, didn't hold me in great stead, I think, because I sort of, and again, this is 10 years down the track that you learn these things. But I think in hindsight, I was probably valuing my own personal ability to bring good to the world, or my own validation of who I was as a person and as a footballer, based on things that are very, very difficult to control once you get to the top level. And obviously the competition becomes a lot stiffer. So it was a fantastic period of time in my life. I was incredibly successful, as I said, as an 18-year-old, had a great time, was really excited to join the league. And in many ways, I think up until probably the last 3 or 4 years, they were probably the happiest times in my life. So, yeah, it was an interesting period. And I think, again, as I said, it's different for every single draftee, let alone every number 1 pick.
Well, yeah, you're right. So right now, over West, number 1 pick lies with West Coast right now. Harley Reid, highly touted. And again, externally, I think people look in and maybe don't understand that you don't get that sort of title, number 1 favourite draft by just being there, or maybe being tall in your case, or that mentality to be the best. I would say that is common across number 1 draft picks. I don't think there'd be many of you guys that just happened to be, picked number 1 and it was good luck. From a young age, do you think that's what differentiates you? It sounds like that's what you've just said.
Yeah, I think you have to choose that you want to be the number 1 pick to a degree. Like, I don't know any player that's come through in the recent years, and admittedly, I'm not a footy nuffy, or I don't live and breathe the draft in particular, but even football like I used to. But you have to get to a stage when I remember entering the sort of top age year of under 18s, going, well, I don't need to go into this year going, I need to prove myself. I'd already proven myself. We won a national championship the year before. I'd been selected in the AIS. I was the best key forward in the draft. I'd won the league goal kicking, team of the year. I'd done everything I needed to do as a sort of 17-year-old, and it was basically the best output that you could get. So then it's like, well, what's next? You can't just go, well, I kicked 46 goals last year or whatever it was, I'm going to kick 70, because that wasn't going to be a viable option for me either, because I wasn't going to play the whole year given the amount of travel we had. So it was really around, well, what do you want to get out of this year, and what's going to drive you to get the most out of yourself? And for me, it was, well, why not go for the number 1 pick? And look, many people have asked me the question since I retired. They go, oh, would it have been different? Would you have got as much pressure if you weren't the number 1 pick? It's an irrelevant question, obviously. It's not something I can change. But the other question to ask is, would I have been offered a massive contract if I wasn't the number 1 pick, key forward player who had proven himself as a junior, so that halfway through my first season, clubs were willing to take a punt on me long term? No. The answer is no. So again, that was my focus going in. And I think that for the most part, all of those guys up the top end of the draft, but in particular those number 1s, have to want to be there, because they got to convince clubs that they can handle the pressure once that actually happens.
What were some of the questions like pre-draft interview with teams? Are they telling you, look, you're probably the number 1 pick, but obviously only one team gets that pick. So are teams, how did that sort of process play out?
Yeah, it's so different for me, I think, than a lot. I mean, so we had the Giants had pick 1 and 2 that year, so they took me and then Josh Kelly. And the typical questions are, I remember walking into the combine in particular, which is obviously where like the most stories come out of. And, there's guys walking around with 20 interviews, like multiple ones with the same club. Every other club's asking him. Everyone who's sort of between, say, picked 15 and 35, you're the most interesting people at the combine, because you're still sort of in between where you can go, whether it be in the first or second round. And I came back and actually kind of felt a bit flat about it. I had 3 interviews. The first was with Melbourne, and they all they wanted to tell me was that I wasn't fit enough, and that was great. And I was like, okay, well, thanks.
Thanks for letting me know.
Appreciate it.
Working at the moment. The other one was with, I think it was with Carlton, maybe. No, it must have been with St Kilda at that stage. And they were great. You know, it was a good chat. They're like, Tom, we're not going to get you, but it was great to spend some time. We just want to do our due diligence. And then the Giants. And the Giants said, hey, Tom, we're going to take you with pick 1, so pack your bags. Actually, I lied. There was a 4th interview because I was sitting around all day at the combine because I didn't do the test. I'd had a massive ankle injury that year. And forgive me for forgetting his name, but the guy from West Coast actually came up to me and he said, do you want to come do an interview with us? You look bored.
Was it Trevor Woodhouse or Rowan O'Brien? It would have been one of those.
Yeah, it would have been one of those. It might have been Rowan. And I was like, sure. So we spent 30 minutes, you know, shooting the breeze and just filling in time. But, you know, again, my experience was so surreal. I just signed an Under Armour contract. I was doing filming off to the side. I was doing, you know, media interviews left, right, and center. I was watching the guys go through the trials. I was listening to the anxiety and the pressure and the despair and frustration and disappointment that all of these guys are facing. And I'm just sitting there going, it's not the same for me. You know, I've already basically embarked on my AFL journey and, it was completely different.
So what's it like walking into GWS the first time then? We've spoken to a few guys over the past 12, 18 months that were a part of those inaugural teams. And, you know, it's a different experience to being drafted to an existing club that is set up well. And GWS, you know, they've gone on to do some great things over the past decade or so, but those early days were pretty tough. Would that be a good descriptor?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying, you know, I almost feel like I missed out a little bit at the Giants in terms of I've heard so many good stories of that place since I was there. And in particular, you know, realistically, it was probably not until, say, end of 2015, 2016 when they really started to hit their straps. And look, you know, there's been so many great people that were there that I know and players that have left and, you know, players that are still there that, you know, it's an incredible, by all accounts, an incredible place to play. And it's a proper club now.
Yeah.
When I joined, it was not, you know, by any stretch of the imagination. And there's a sort of a few key factors that I remember that really stand out to me. And look, I think to go back to the draft process, I got drafted on a Thursday night. I think it was mid-November or 23rd or something like that. I started preseason I went to sleep in Sydney on the Sunday. That's how fast things change. Yeah. And, you know, within that period of time, whilst I had a runway of a month and a half to think about, I'm going to the Giants and I'm moving to Sydney and I actually could organise the stuff. So I had a car up there and all this sort of stuff. Those 3 nights are the only ones that really matter in terms of preparing because you realise it's now happening. It's certainly happening, and now I'm ready to go. And you know, you go into these apartments with, you know, we're living at Breakfast Point, which is one of the most heavily publicised, incorrectly stories of all time, where I think they all thought we lived in like a mansion together.
Well, I think I thought that.
I think I had
we lent into it too because I remember posting a photo of the country club at Breakfast Point and saying it's a great new place to be living. All of my mates thought that we lived in a mansion with like 40 blokes. Breakfast Point is like many suburbs in Sydney, so the planned suburbs they do up there. I think there was 10,000 people ended up living in that suburb, so we were just a very small part of it. But It was kind of living like it was like living in the Truman Show, like very old population, sort of. You know, you've got your own sterile shopping centre and you've got your own little oval and country club. It's almost like living on a golf course, which was really weird. Yes. And certainly nothing that I'd experienced before. And then you walk into the club, quote unquote, which wasn't finished at that stage because they'd built in Blacktown. Then they moved out of there when they realised no one wanted to travel an hour and 40 minutes out of town. And then our new facility at Tom Wills Oval wasn't built yet. So I was training in the underground the gym is a strong word, of the ATH Centre from the 2000 Olympic Games. And there was probably a 10 metres by 4 metres gym. There was, you know, stuff everywhere, offices that were just crammed with paper. It was tiny and it just didn't fit us at all. And this is going to sound like the most uppity AFL sookie thing ever, but when you have to like go to the facility and then you have to pack your bags and then drive 7 minutes to go to training and then drive 7 minutes back and then, you know, you get strapped at the center and then you go to it was just a nightmare. Like kids were all late all the time.
Yes.
That sounds horrific. I'm really sorry you had to go through that, mate. That sounds really bad.
Yeah. You didn't have angry people like Leon Cameron yelling at you, Dan, when you were late. But the other thing was like that group of players was so unique at that stage. And what I mean by unique is that there might have been 20 first round picks in that group. And then there was like this next cohort of guys who were basically trying to prove themselves as, serious players in the league, like the Scullys and the Wards and the Davis of the world. And then you had this other cohort, which was like Dean Brogan, Chad Corns, Luke Power, Josh Hunt had played with us, Stephen Gillum. And it was like, 3 different materials that kind of didn't mix, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what I found was there was just so much insecurity, from myself included, I must say, around who was going to play the next week, who was, in this position, what you were supposed to do around the club, who was the big dog around the place, what the standards were. Everything was so ambiguous because we were just trying to figure it out. That, I didn't enjoy that part because it wasn't a football club to me. It wasn't what I'd grown up with. It wasn't the, hierarchical age thing that you see at most of these senior clubs. And look, we also sucked. So that wasn't making it any easier.
So do you remember your first game then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. First game ever played at Adelaide Oval by Adelaide. And Danger, I think, had 4 and 25 at half time.
How did you play?
We were down. Oh, no, I might as well not have been out there. I think we were down by 60 at half time. We lost by maybe 80 or 90 points. I had 5 touches for the day. I think we had maybe in the teens for inside 50s. Pretty dark day. Dark day. Yeah, tough.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, like you said, you built up with a bunch of young blokes. It turns it into a pretty tough task when you get no inside 50s as a key forward running around down there. So you played 9 games in your first season with GWS. At what point does a trade become an option, thought about, viable, given you the number 1 pick? You're a Victorian, obviously, but for a number 1 pick to be traded after their first year, it's pretty unique.
Yeah, so there'd been a few clubs that had attempted to get the number 1 pick the year before. I don't want to allegedly. Carlton had a crack. I think the Saints had a discussion. Maybe the Bulldogs have been really hot on it, like really hot on trying to get it as much as they possibly can. And look, they've had a long littered history of key forwards that have been there for a little bit, and they've never really had that guy who was, like the Aaron Norton signing that just happened. The guy that's going to be there for 10 to 12 years, be there every week, play every week, all that sort of stuff. So I remember it was around the middle of the season, or must have been maybe in the first third of the season, that Dad called me up on a Thursday night, and it was pretty stereotypical. Dad had called me, chit chat about the weekend, what's coming up, what did they say about last week, what are you going to do differently, just typical father and son discussions about footy. And then midway through the discussion, Dad just goes, "Oh, you've had a contract offer," and it was like he just had a frog in his throat and it just jumped out. It was real strange. Now, like, to be clear, my dad grew up in Fawkner, was a Sparky all his life, dealt with, the unions. Like, he's not exactly a man of many words. He's a very serious and scary individual for the most part. And that's saying something because I've got, 7 or 8 inches on him at the moment. So he still scares the shit out of me. But anyway. And I, as you do, I said, "Well, what's his contract offer?" And he said maybe the dumbest thing he's ever said to me in his life. He goes, "Tom, you got a really big game this weekend. I don't want you to think too much about this contract. I want you to focus on the game. I want you to go out there, play well, and I'm flying up to see you, and we'll talk about it on Sunday." So I thought about the contract for the next 3 days, played rubbish, and just walked in being like, "Mate, this is so stupid." And we sat down at a place called the Palace Hotel in Breakfast Point. I was in Concord, technically, the pub that we all used to go to. Kevin Sheedy's favourite pub, actually, whilst he was living up there.
Can I have a beer, Kev?
Yeah. There's a tab there too, just coincidentally.
Still open.
Yeah. And we sat down for a steak dinner. And anyway, so Dad sort of was not saying anything. And so I asked him, "What are you going to tell me about what's going on?" And he said, "Well, the offer's from the Bulldogs." And, I didn't know a lot about the Dogs at the time. Being an Eastside boy, they weren't super relevant. Like, I remember the 8, 9, 10 years, they were awesome to watch. Like, loved watching them play through those prelims. But, there was Bont was there, who I'd played footy with. Nathan Rovat was there, Mitch Honeychurch, Jack McRae. A few of these guys that I played state footy or with through the juniors were there. And so I was like, "Oh, okay, I understand." I know they're down the bottom of the ladder-ish. I think they were sort of 14th or something like that. Had no idea they were over the Westgate. That's how well I was going. And if you're not from Melbourne, that most to you. But the Westgate's how you get everywhere west. And
I'm from Geelong. I know exactly what's going on.
I didn't know that the Footscray was over there. So, then I said to Dad, what's the offer? And he goes, 7 over 7. And I said, $700,000 a year for 7 years. How good's that? I was like, sitting there doing math, being like, I could buy 20 Land Cruisers for that much money. And, before I got too carried away by the tyre size I was going to put on those things, he goes, no, 7 mil over 7 years. And, it was one of those things which, to this day, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a ridiculous amount of money for any player. But, the cherry on top is, I played probably 3 or 4 of those 9 games you mentioned earlier at that stage. I hadn't played any good in pretty much any of them. Maybe had a good quarter against or 2 against Geelong. But I was also, from all I understand, that was the second biggest deal in AFL history at that stage. Right behind Buddies as Pickers, who was my manager too, who did that one the year before. So it was just this like, holy shit moment. And then you start working out, well, the anxiety or the anticipation that comes from that is how we're going to get a deal done, because it seems obvious as the choice that you're going to make, which is I'm going to go and sign this massive deal, but it's not as simple as that. And it does take time and in the end, quite a bit of luck.
So Ryan Griffin's involved in the deal that gets done in the end, a few first-round draft picks. Ryan Griffin, of course, the captain of the Western Bulldogs at the time, walks away effectively. The coach has sacked Brendan McCartney. So there's a fair bit going on at the time when the actual deal gets done. But to sort of separate the mechanics, are you 19 at this stage? Like at the end of that year, are you 19 when this is happening?
Yeah, August 22, I turned 19. This would have been in October. So I've been in 19 for 5 weeks.
And so just to clarify, your dad brought the deal to you. What was that sort of?
Is he your manager at the time?
Yeah.
So my manager then and now, 10 years or 11 years we've almost been together, is Liam Pickering and James Pitcher. So the guys who are then from Strategic, I think their name was, but they've changed. They work for the Bravo guys now and Hutchie. But the mechanics was essentially, this deal is so big, there was only 2 people in the world who knew about it outside of obviously the Western Bulldogs, which was Liam Pickering and my dad. So, and maybe Pitch at that stage, I don't know. But Dad basically was just the one who communicated it to me, because he there's a thing about managers, they're amazing at keeping secrets until they're not. And I found out later that once they don't want to keep a secret, it gets out so fast. But with Dad basically coming up and talking to me, he just wanted to basically explain as the adult of the household and someone who'd obviously looked after me my whole life up until about 6 months before this, what was going on, what was going to happen next. And the conversation was really around, we're going to go back and see them during the bye. We're going to go and visit them. They're going to give us a presentation. We're going to talk about how to get the deal done. And then you make a decision. And I was like, oh, great. And I needed that from him, because as you can probably, maybe you can't imagine, but as you can probably try to imagine, as an 18-year-old hearing a deal like that, you're trying to piece together basically how to teleport in time to the point where you get your first paycheck. So he was helping me with that. And then, look, it was more, as a father and someone as I really, really look up to, and I've always respected his advice and wisdom. It was really around, how do we get this done? Once we get the chance to possibly have a crack at it, do we go after it? And how do I mentally stay strong through what is likely to be quite a tumultuous period of time through this trade period?
To put it in context for people that haven't been on AFL lists, my lowly draft position of 50 was just the 49 behind Tom's. In my first year, I was on $45,000 plus match fees, and I made the big jump up to $60,000 plus the same match fees in my second year. So Tom went from whatever he was on in that first year.
69,000.
You're on 69. Okay, so you weren't that far in front of me, and then you made a little bit of a jump to $1 million the next 7 years. So, I mean, I think it's important, because I think some people sort of would not understand the context of that deal. And you said it yourself. It's at the time, there's some big money being thrown around on some big years sort of post this, but at the time, it's the biggest deal in AFL history for a 19-year-old, with the rest of the competition's 19-year-olds somewhere in the early, tens of thousands. That's the difference that Tom was.
Yeah.
Didn't the Giants come out, Tom, and say Tom Boyd will not be traded under any circumstances?
Yeah, well, Dave Matthews, who I ran into at the Albert Park pub not that long ago, he goes, "You're the only player we ever lied about." He goes, "You're the only player that we actually ended up changing our mind and getting to that point." But to that point, like when guys get drafted, it's especially back then. I don't know what the salaries are now. Again, walking out of school into 69 grand, I think we had cost of living and chucked on that, which was 10 or 12%. And then I had a couple of other things that came through, given that I was the number one pick. It's good money. It's crazy money for a guy who'd come straight out of school, but it's not life changing for a lot of people. And there's people again don't want to hear this. It's expensive to be an AFL footballer, especially when you're young, compared to your mates who are at uni eating ramen at home and just pottering along and drinking beers only at happy hour. There's a lot of cost that goes into eating the right things and travel and organising your finances and all that sort of stuff. So it was a massive jump forward. And to the point about whether they actually said they were going to trade me or not, it was just this period of time where I'd gone away at the end of that first season and I was cooked. It had been a big year. Much like the college system in the States, that first season, say if you get drafted into the NFL, it's kind of a 2-year straight run, because you don't get any time off, because that off season that you typically get at the end of the year is spent doing the draft, preparing for the combine, all of that sort of, and for us in Australia, it's doing your exams as well. So I'd essentially been running nonstop from January to the end of, definitely not into September that year, at the end of August, with the Giants. And so I'd gone away. So I said I wanted to go overseas. I went over to the place called the Mentawais for a surf retreat. There's no reception, nothing. It was just get away. Thankfully, I signed power of attorney over to my manager before I left. And whilst I'm over there, that news of Griff asking for a trade to us, right, specifically to the Giants, which is a big part of this whole thing, broke. And I got this sense that obviously something was happening. My manager texted me, Dad texted me, because we could do iMessage over the Wi-Fi. And the advice I got given all through all the turmoil, because there was no guarantee this was going to go through, the likelihood that they just said, no, go away, bad luck. It was going to make my life so much more difficult dealing with the Giants players the following year and the club as a whole and the football public, right? Especially if the number got out. But Dad said to me something that always has stood out in my mind from a memory point of view, which was, for everything good that happened in his life, especially in business, it always happened when he was willing to take a risk. And he was willing to put something on the line and risk something to get something more than what he currently had. And I took that in as a 19-year-old and had a crack. And mate, the next few days were hell on earth. Like the amount of people who were not happy with the number, because the 7-year, $7 million contract leaked at that stage, right in the midst of this whole thing. And the criticism came thick and fast. Much of it was obviously online. It wasn't really getting to me at that moment, but in hindsight, it was quite significant. And to the point of the 19-year-olds, the thing that happened with me that really changed the landscape, if you will, is not the money or the time. It's the fact that I was the first real high draft pick who said, you sign me for 2 years, I don't care, I'm going to leave anyway, and force my way out of the club. And that, for the football loyalists, the club media departments, even the AFL as a whole, is a real threat to their model of building players as part of these clubs and the superstars that drive membership, the superstars that drive viewership. I was doing the exact opposite. I was getting out of this new club who needed players like, hopefully I would end up have been to stay and to build something at the Giants. But obviously I had other ideas.
It sounds like you've got an incredibly close relationship with your father.
Yeah, I mean, he's always been the guy to turn to when I've needed advice or support. He's also one of the few people I think in my life who, look, Dad, as I said, Dad grew up with a pretty tough upbringing, but has always been a leader of men. Right, he's always been the captain or the coach, or he's ended up owning his own business with hundreds of employees. Like Dad did really well for himself from a really low base, and I think he's always had probably the mental fortitude and the toughness and the ability to not care what other people think that I really didn't have at that stage. I much more took after my mum and wanted to please people, make sure people were happy and they liked me, and I was professional and do the right things and all that sort of stuff. And look, the thing that's changed, I would say, to me now as a 28-year-old is I couldn't give two shits what people say. anymore. It just really doesn't bother me. And you make up your own mind and your own opinions. And, we were joking before we started recording about how big your thumbs are with all of your tweeting. But in all honesty, I love that stuff now, because as a footballer, and it'd be interesting to hear your opinion, as a footballer, you're trained to walk the party line, not stand out, not say anything that's untoward, that'll give attention to the club or yourself. In fact, in most cases, if you don't have the opinion that everyone else is supposed to have, you might as well not have an opinion at all. And I found that incredibly difficult to deal with, because I did well at school. I was interested in other things. But my opinion and those parts of myself that I valued and value to this day didn't matter unless I kicked enough goals on the weekend.
Yeah, the performance element inside footy clubs, I hold pretty similar views. Similar to you, I valued school probably as high, if not higher, than footy when I was a youngster. Didn't have the same sort of credentials, I guess, coming out of junior footy, but I found everyone having to form under the same banner. This is what you say. This is what you don't say. I call bullshit on that pretty early. And although I wasn't as outspoken as I have been probably post-career, I still at times during my time at West Coast found myself in a closed room with 4 or 5 people sitting down saying, why did you say this? And most of the time the answer was, well, it's just what I kind of think about it. And, towards the end of my career, probably, I was no hero. I was never going to keep going forever, but probably there was the physical side, but there was a mental side with the fight and the towing the company line bullshit that used to go on that I sort of had enough of. So, I can definitely, certainly empathise from one point, but also, agree with what you're saying with the characters that form in the AFL now, which we're starting to see a bit more of, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there are characters. That's the thing. But historically, the characters have been the ones who get in trouble, right?
Correct.
And look, there is more to football than the pin-up boy perfect citizen that we just described, and the opposite of that, the Dane Swan character of, I'm just a lad playing football. I don't really care about anything. Like, they're the two archetypes that I see, and I've seen over a long period of time. To your point, there's really interesting guys who are interested in stuff out of footy, and girls for that matter. There's people who are, incredibly differently inclined, whether they think about the world differently or whether they think about football differently. It doesn't really matter. There's so many different individuals that make our great game the great game that it is. And we've been robbed of those personalities for a long time because, one, it's not favourable for the clubs to have multiple personalities to deal with. Two, the media is very, I would say, they fit into the same model that everyone else has up until the last 3 years, which is you've got 7 or 8 minutes to prove your point, and that's it. And then, finally, I remember hearing many stories since retiring, and I never went down the media path, but hearing about players who are incredibly good at doing the media piece on television and had opinions and thoughts. But if you don't have enough accolades to put in your title that sits below your name, you're not going to get on television. So all of this stuff sort of melts in together. And I think for me, and again, this is not a criticism of the Bulldogs or the league as a whole, I just didn't fit into that mold. And, I've been incredibly lucky to do what I want to do since I finished football. And I think what you learn is that, in many ways, your career that you choose is the place that you grow the most. But it's also the career that you choose that often is the reason that you grow the least, right? And in football, a certain part of me grew very, very quickly. Ability to take feedback, high performance, how to work within high-performing teams, how to deal with stress and pressure, how to perform under big moments, the physical side, But the ability to understand how to communicate in a corporate environment, nothing. The ability to improve my education, very, very difficult to do during a very busy schedule that you have during your football career. There's all sorts of things that I wanted to do, which I have done since, that football doesn't allow the space for, and really that's why I moved on.
What about the mentality and I guess the mental side of your pathway? And I look at it as a pretty unique one. Number 1 draft pick your first year. You get traded at the end of that year. You sign a deal that's one of the biggest in the AFL. And by the end of your 3rd year, you're a premier and you play well in that game, which there's not many other things as an AFL player you'd like to hang your hat on, playing well in a grand final, winning one. Not that you've done everything that you can do in the AFL, but I think a lot's happened in 3 years. What's that mental side like? And I don't just mean from a mental health perspective. I mean the mentality. And you speak about that as a junior, having that, I'm going to be better than everyone else, does that fade? Does that increase? Like where is all that with some of the pressures surrounded with, I guess all of that pathway?
Yeah, I think it depends where you're at from a maturity point of view. I think there were certainly moments in time when I was at the Giants and I thought it was everyone else's fault that I wasn't playing that well. And look, you can do that as a forward anyway. You can blame the delivery, you can blame the lack of opportunity. There's all sorts of things that you can blame if you're not careful. So I think there was an immaturity piece there. I think once I got back to the Bulldogs, I really took a step back in the sense of I just wanted to improve. And I certainly did that in my second season. And then, with all of the vitriol that I got over those 2 years leading into the Premiership with the Bulldogs, I think the thing that really stuck with me in my mind, and look, I've heard so many stories of players who talk about the challenges they've faced and maybe they hadn't talked about previously. And they talk about, even when I was winning a Premiership or kicking a big goal, I felt that, that angst, that issue that I had off the field was still there with me then. And that wasn't the case for me. The final series in particular was an incredibly happy period of time in my life. But what I did think post that, and again, I think this comes back to a maturity piece and maybe a naivety or an inability to see what the world actually looks like, which was, what are these people going to say to me now? Like, what are they going to say in criticism or in spite or whatever their sort of frustration and negative emotion that they're expressing towards me as this young guy getting paid a lot of money and probably not living up to their standards at that stage? What are they going to say now to the points that you made? Premiership player, $1 million a year, first number one pick, all in 3 seasons. And, I think the thing that I lost sight of was, one, the challenge of football never ends. It beats everyone eventually. The challenge of turning up, getting your body right, dealing with the mental aspect, dealing with the monotonous grind, dealing with preseason, the crowds, the mistakes, the failure. It never ends until it does, and then you leave. I thought that was going to end and that I was going to be able to have some space to just grow at the pace that I thought was fair. And then the other piece was, for all of the accolades and the fever pitch of that grand final and the moments that I had, 10 days later, I was in surgery for a shoulder reco. 2 weeks after that, I get an ankle clean out. I spend the next 6 weeks, in a sling and on a crutch, come back to the footy club, haven't run once in the off season because I'm not allowed to. And then you're chasing your tail next season. So, life changes really, really quickly. And I think it's more around, well, are you going to change with it and work out what you want to do? Or are you just going to continue to chase after something that you thought you wanted in the past?
What did you feel more pressure from, the number one draft pick or the big contract?
Yeah, then it's too hard to differentiate. I think really it's around, the number one pick, the gloss of that fades. So, your first season, they expect a lot of you, the second year, third year. But after a while, people might say, oh, he's not that good. Maybe he was the number one pick. But the money doesn't. The money that you're on is the judge, jury, and executioner every single year for every player. So, I think a good example is, as I mentioned earlier, Aaron Norton kicks almost 50 goals this year, but he didn't have a good year because everyone's like, he's on good money and he's an up and coming superstar. But that yardstick is never something that you can ever really live up to unless you're in the top 5 or 6 players in the league. And they're the ones that everyone goes, oh, they deserve it. And then, they have one half bad game and they're like, this guy's rubbish or whatever. So it's impossible to make the distinction, I think. But certainly once that money came in, that's the kerosene on the fire that really caused the pressure. And look, I've said this to people 1,000 times. Getting tweeted at mean stuff is, it's not nice, especially when you're young, but it was fine. I just ignore it by the end. Same as Instagram and social media. Getting screamed at the footy is less nice, especially when you got your wife or your mum or your dad sitting there and these people aren't abusing you because you missed a kick. They're abusing you because you're a stain on the earth. The ones that really got me were, when I'm in the supermarket and people are abusing me, or I'm walking down the street, people are hollering stuff out of cars. That's what I was dealing with when I first came back to Melbourne. And what that led me to do was like, I'm just going to go to training, going to go to the game, I'm going to come home. And that's about the 3 places that I feel comfortable spending. Every time that I went out to any social event, I was having issues with people, especially if there's any drinking going on. It was just a nightmare. So that's where really the rubber met the road for me. And as I said, being a number one pick's enough, but if you pour a massive contract, which I accepted, by the way, and I'm glad that I did, that's where the real fire starts.
It's outrageous that you are, for like such a positive thing, like all these things we're talking about, they're all like any AFL player would literally be like, you want to do that tomorrow? You'd probably do it. Number one pick, big contract, premiership. Yeah, you're talking about the abuse you're copying in the supermarket. I hadn't really heard you speak about that, so I think that's outrageous. Not from you speaking about it, but yeah, the fact that it actually happened.
Who's got the balls?
That would be good.
Who's got like
balls?
The courage to go up to someone at a supermarket.
Courage?
Yeah, well,
who's got the courage? Who's the weakest human in the fucking world that wants to walk up to someone in a supermarket?
It's a weak act, but you still have to build up the courage to go say that to someone. It's still
it's pretty easy when you're doing a drive-by in the cars. That's when
Sorry, that triggered me a little bit.
In all honesty, let me tell you one thing. So before the best game of my career, the best moment in my sporting career, other than obviously the ones we mentioned earlier, I'm driving through the grand final parade, and there's 180,000 people there, and 99.999% of them are going, Tom was an absolute integral reason that we're here because he was the only ruckman that we had in the prelim. So nice. And amongst all of that, I still hear these two young fellas who I got no idea who they are and never will yell out, oh, Boyd, $1 million a year, useless piece of shit or something like that, whilst I'm sitting in a Hilux. And to the point, it's like, there's no courage involved in yelling that. We're stuck on a car moving 3 kilometers an hour. But, your ears are so tuned to hearing what's negative in the world. And, as I said, it'd haunt me for days. But then the positive stuff that people would give me would wash over me in seconds. And that's just the way the brain works, I suppose.
Memories from the grand final? Like what are the specific moments that stay with you?
Yeah, the first goal that I kicked, so it must have been in the second quarter, so I kicked that left foot snap, which, obviously the most talked about goal is that final one. You give me that ball about 150 times, I'll kick it once, I reckon. I could always kick on my left. I was quite a good left foot kick for a big guy, but and I'd practice that, and I'll give you all the exceptions. But that, I couldn't see between the posts. It was as deep in that pocket as I could, and I didn't even have to look. As soon as I kicked it, it was going through, and I think that really gave me. I started the game with a drop mark that everyone said was a nervous thing, and it's really funny because Nick Floston from Richmond is one of my best mates, and he had a similar thing happen in his first grand final, one of three, mind you, in 2017, where he slipped over or something. And everyone goes, oh, it's nerves. And me and him have had many a laugh about this. Marcus Bontempelli kicked the ball at 500 miles an hour, about a foot off the ground, and it was swinging all over the joint. And they're like, just catch it. Can't see that on tally. And then Nick was like, mate, the turf came up underneath me. What do you want me to do? So that was the first moment. The goal in the second quarter was a great moment. And I just had this overwhelming sense the whole day that we were going to win. Like before we got there, it was like, talking on the phone to Dad on the way in. I think he ran out of advice. This is the one moment in my life that he never had advice for because, I think the 89 Division 3 grand final didn't really compare, But he said, let's just see how we go. And that was the attitude I took in. Let's just see how we go. Let's just see if we can, have a crack and have a real run at it. And we'd had the wood over Sydney a bit in those 2 years leading up to it. We'd beaten them in a thriller up there early in the year and beaten them up there in the wet the year before. So we were really confident against them. But, that last moment, the last moment, at least for me, that goal was something that I'll forget.
Siren going, Western Bulldogs hadn't won a flag in however many years. Even though you don't start your career there, that must be regardless of what happens for the rest of your career, it must be a pinnacle.
Yeah, I think you appreciate them more as time goes on. I mean, there's probably 42 players who have played in the Bulldogs Premiership, and they've been around for 150 years. And of those 42, likely speaking, there's about 30 of us alive. That's a pretty special thing to be a part of. And I think that the history of the Bulldogs, and this is not to disparage the other clubs, but, Footscray is a poor place. It has never been a wealthy place. It's been a place that's been filled with the hard blue-collared workers of Melbourne, a lot of immigration and migrants around our suburbs, and that's all relevant and evident in our great club. And I think to be able to finally give them what they'd wanted after 7 lost prelims, and for them to actually be the champions of the town rather than just the almost theirs and the underdogs, as they'd always been described, was it's something that you can't measure. You can't measure on a device or anything like that. But for me, it comes through in the conversations you have with the old stalwarts of the club and the people who have supported the Bulldogs and Footscray since they were kids and then well into their 80s.
A lot has been talked about Bob Murphy and his involvement in that. Obviously, Bevo gives him his medal. From the inside, what was his sort of involvement and how crucial he was to the team at that point? Because on the outside, it seems like a nice gesture, and they talk about how crucial he was. What was it for you as a player?
Yeah, I mean, so I think Bob's the crucial impact that Bob had was he stood up in 2014 when everything turned to shit. When Griff left, when obviously Brendan was sacked, and then not to mention that we had Simon Garlick, our CEO, was pushed out not long after during that off season. So he stood up in a time where we needed a leader, and he led, and he brought a new tone to the Bulldogs at that stage because. Matty Boyd, who I'm an incredibly big fan of, he's just the hardest man on earth. And there was an element, I think, that Brendan had brought, from my understanding, that it was hardness, it was contested, it was Daniel Cross, it was Matty Boyd, it was these absolute maniacs who played and went after football in one way, which was 1,000 miles an hour. And there was a changing of the age group and the complexion of the list at that stage that meant that wasn't working. And that they needed to work out how they got the most out of players rather than just trying to turn everyone into Matthew Boyd or Mitch Wallace, who was playing and tagging, or Libba, or these contested footballers. There was so much more to the team than that. And both Bob and Bevo came in, and then their one word was, I don't care where you think you play. We're going to play you where you play your best footy. And for those 2 years, that's what happened. And I think to Bob, it was absolutely devastating to lose him in round 3, and it was sort of unthinkable. But the challenge is, and the challenge that all those boys faced, and I don't just mean Bob, I mean Mitchy Wallace was one of them, Jack Redpath, Lin Jong, Matt Suckling towards the end of these guys who were first team players who were missing out on a grand final, and they could see it coming. And also, not all grand finals are equal. There's moments in time when, perhaps you look at Collingwood this year. Collingwood could win it again next year. And I think a lot of the players in that list are going, let's gear up and go again because we missed out. It was a different story with us. Whilst we were still confident leading into the 2017 year, we'd gone on a run that had never happened in AFL history to win that premiership. So I think that the challenge for those guys, both now and then, was, how do I not negatively impact my teammates? How do I try in some way, shape or form to positively impact them whilst they're going through the dreams that I've had since I was 3 years old, and I can't go through that with them, and I'm as close to as possible to being there, but I'm not, and I never will be. And the reunions won't have me, and I'm not really a part of the team. I won't have a medal that lasts with me forever. I won't be in the pictures. All of that stuff is incredibly difficult to deal with, and I think Bob, amongst those other boys, just their utmost to drag us all through to make sure that they were making a positive impact, not a negative one, which is not something that's easy to do.
So that 2016 Western Bulldogs side handed me and my teammates one of the great sprays of all time, knocking us off at Subiac Oval.
I bet they did. What happened?
Mate, Nizzy, I remember because we were 5th, you were 8th. I think that's right. Is that right?
And you guys had a great finish to the end of that year.
Oh, yeah, we were sizzling, mate. Don't worry about that. We were absolutely sizzling. We just been in the grand final the year before. Like you said, it was like we lost that grand final. We'll just win next year. And we just missed top 4, but, it's like the Bulldogs coming over from just being done by Freo the week before. You had no one playing. It's like, we'll just, Western Bulldogs first, but the rest, we're focused on that. And anyway, we won't go through the game. I remember Nizzy walking into the change rooms afterwards and just teeing off. No one's got the iron prize. You're all, blah, blah, blah. It was one of the great sprays. So thank you for that, Tom. Appreciate that, mate.
Well, do you want to I'll make you feel worse, is that the night before, so we had 2 groups of players fly in. I don't know if you know this. So we had We had guys fly in who'd had ankle injuries like me or soft tissues. We flew in on the Thursday. Oh, no, it must have been on the Tuesday, I suppose, because we played the Thursday night.
Yeah.
So it was like, let's not risk any inflammation or swelling. And then the main group came in the day before, and they were supposed to land at 2 p.m. local time. They didn't get a plane until 4 Melbourne time, and they landed they got to the hotel at 8:15 p.m. the night before that game. So we didn't get to do a captain's run. We went down to Trinity College in the dark and jogged around and pretended like we knew what we were doing. It was the worst possible preparation I've ever had for a game of football.
Yeah, it makes me feel great. Thanks, mate. All the time for that, fortunately.
Thanks, Tom.
It's very good. So with all these positive things, and I think it's been, this is 3 years of your career, by the way, which I just think is ridiculous. I do feel like looking at everything and researching for this and having a look at everything, it's almost like you've fast-tracked everything throughout your career. Everything that happened to you, a lot of people take 15 years to do it. You did it in 3. What's happening off-field for you? What sort of headspace are you in? Because I think it's an important part of your story.
Now or during my career at that stage?
During your career, during these 3 years, and then, you finish your AFL career after 7 years and it's cut short. So what's happening through this? I would think a lot of positivity times. Are you in a good headspace or not?
Yeah, so the 2 years where things really got out of control before it all I announced in 17 what was going on was really 15 and 16. So, I remember going up to the Giants and having a few issues with sleep and, stressing about the game or stressing about training and sitting up and staring at the ceiling until the early hours of the morning before you had to go out and run 15 Ks and being like, this is weird. But really the mood side of things, above and beyond the sleep issues I was facing, really started to get out of control in 2015. And what it looked like for the most part was, I wouldn't sleep and then I'd feel incredibly anxious and then I'd go and train and I'd feel a bit better, but then I'd be so tired that I'd have issues with depression later in that time period. And, there were periods of time through 16 in particular where, I wouldn't sleep Thursday, Friday night, then you'd play a game and then you'd play rubbish and then you'd feel horrible for 2 days and then you'd just try and ramp it back up and play again the next week. And they would go, that at times went for a month or two at a time. At times, to your point, there was great months. There was great periods of time. And that's why I think, I never dealt with that really dangerous mental state that I was in because I was like, well, it might turn around in a week and it might turn around in a few weeks. And then when it did, I was like, see, it'll be fine. And then 2 weeks later, I'd find myself in the same position and, really, really in some dark places. And as I said to you, I think, after 2 years of really, significantly dealing with those issues, sleep, anxiety and later depression through 15 and 16, I was really in the headspace that after winning a premiership, it was like, it's got to improve. Like everything has to improve. But, coming back to that footy club, it was like being hit with a sledgehammer. The dread of trying to get ready again for another season, the pressure of performing. The conversation around me was one that they've said 1,000 times, which was, Tomahawk kicked 3 in his premiership in 2011, and then he became a great player. Now, Tomahawk was a few years older than me in terms of comparing age to age, but it was exactly what I was thinking. Like, I've had the breakout game. I've had the breakout season. Let's turn this into a career. But, by the middle of 2017, the same issues have been going on and on and on through preseason, through the start of the year. And then I got to a point where I just didn't sleep for 2 weeks and I was still playing football at the top level. And then I was sort of coming in and out of the side with injury, which had never really been an issue for me. And I was having calf injuries or hamstring injuries. I was getting sick all the time. I couldn't concentrate. And, as you know, concentration is such a large part of playing AFL football. And I'm going, I can't keep doing this. And I got no idea what I'm going to change. And look, I think, I just got to the point where so many people do, whether it be in football or in professional life, where you essentially just get to the point of having a complete breakdown of, your mind, body and ability to control your emotions. And, thankfully for me and for many of the AFL boys, and unfortunately not enough people in the community, I had someone I could talk to, which was the club psych. And, I spent a couple of hours with her on the day that I, was basically taking time off footy. And, unfortunately as a, 22-year-old at that stage, or 21-year-old still probably, footballer on $1 million a year just won a premiership. You don't get to take a sick day and not tell people why. So a big part of my challenge was and fear of really dealing with this issue above and beyond. I didn't know what it was. Above and beyond, I didn't want to let people down. I didn't want to talk to people in the public about what was going on. And I had to get to that point in 17 where I was willing to actually confront it and tell the world what was going on and why I needed to take time off, just like anyone else. I needed to rehabilitate my mind, just like people need to rehabilitate their bodies and get back to the best version of myself. So it was a crazy 4-year run into that moment. To your point, all the good things we covered first, but it was littered with all of these negative moments and these negative months where I was just absolutely at my wit's end. But every time that I thought the world couldn't get any worse, I'd do something that was amazing and something great would happen. And I'd be like, oh, well, it's all worth it. And then the dopamine hit would run off and I'd find myself in a really bad place again.
How did you know that wasn't just part and parcel of being an AFL footballer at that level? Because, you're getting success as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, for one, the sleep post-game is a part of being an AFL footballer, particularly if you play night games. Like, I don't know what you were like, but mate, sleeping after finishing a game at 11 o'clock at night under the lights that Eddie had it's not easy. So I understood that component of it. And I think to the question, I knew that things were getting bad when, I wouldn't sleep at all. And I talked to boys about like, I just haven't slept that well. And they'd be like, yeah, I couldn't get to sleep till like 11 o'clock last night. And I was like, 11, that sounds all right. I was up till 5. So it was a bit of that. And then I think just the fact that, it hadn't happened in my junior career. I'd never experienced issues like this when I was growing up. And there was no reason to feel the way that I was feeling. But again, I didn't learn about mental health when I was at school. I didn't understand what anxiety was, didn't understand what depression was or what, regular sleep above and beyond what I was, get your 8 hours. So when you don't know what a problem is and you can't define it, it's not easy to come up with a solution. And again, we all as people, I think we do two things to make life easier. The first is we look at what we see in the world as the people that we want to be as being successful. So we go, oh, they've got the car or they've got the house or they've got the job or they're in the media, maybe they're playing footy, right? So they've got the complexion of life. That's happiness. And what we do is we go, well, I'm going to itemize those things and select them and try and bring them into my life. And if I have them, then I'll be happy. So we go down that path. And, for me, that was something 100% that I was looking at. But the other thing that we do is, and you see this in professional services in Melbourne, it's or in all of the states, but it's so common in professional services, say your legal and accounting and finance and banking is, if I just get to that next outcome that I'm looking for, whether it's in your work, finish the big project or, complete the big assignment, win that award, get the promotion. If I get there, the 17 issues I'm dealing with now or whatever the number is will disappear because I'm now at that stage. And when I'm there, they won't be important anymore. It'll be fine. And typically speaking, what happens is that people get to that moment and then they go, holy shit, my life's the exact same as what it was, except now I've taken on more pressure, more stress, more accountability, more responsibility. And I still haven't dealt with those things that have been here. And that's exactly what happened to me in the sense that I knew there was an issue. I knew I needed to deal with it. I knew something was going wrong. But I had enough in my life from a milestone point of view up until that premiership in 16 to go, I still got things to accomplish. If I can accomplish them and be a good enough footballer, it won't matter. All this stuff will go away.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good question, Dan, because I was sort of sitting here thinking and can relate a little bit. Look up, sleep was never an issue for me. I certainly know oil painting over here. I've got my own issues, but sleep I could do. But the up and down nature of AFL footy like that I can, completely see that. And I think a lot of AFL guys would be the same. It's like, we've got a lot of these issues, but if we can just win this weekend, then everything will be better next week. And then maybe it is better next week and then you lose and it's like, oh my God, the fucking world is going to end this week. And then you might win and it's a roller coaster of emotions, really, if you just break it down. So look, clearly I think you had more of an extreme roller coaster. And I was just wondering, like, was there like a real dark point or was there a real moment where you thought like, fuck, this is bad? Or was it just a build up that turned it into what it was. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you describing that the roller coaster of football is a really good example of what changed for me. So to your point, I went up and down like everyone, right? But I got to a point where winning, I didn't feel good at all. I just got to the point where I was like, "Thank fuck we didn't lose." and it was beyond that thought. It was like life is not going to be horrible this week,
right?
And if we lost, it was throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of stuff. So. To answer the question, I mean, yes, we got to a point. And sort of around 2017, as I said, so I think we played against Melbourne and I'd played 3 quarters. And this had happened a couple of times that year where my calf and my hamstring and like all of these neural issues, which I never really had before, I just started playing up crazy. And I couldn't get through that game. And then I had a week off. And then I think they said, look, we want you to play a half in the VFL because we're going over to play West Coast next week. You're going to play. And I remember sitting there going, there's no way, and again, I hadn't slept in 2 weeks, like there's no way I'm getting through a VFL game of footy. There's no way in hell. Like I can't possibly do that. And, I'd had 1,000 negative thoughts an hour for the last 6 months, at least at that stage, probably longer. But at that moment, I'm sitting there going, I can't possibly go to do this thing they're asking me to do. But the alternative is I'm going to have to go to the club somehow and take a week off footy, which is not an option. And, again, AFL players have got it very, very good. The one thing that we have, I think, that above and beyond everything else is there's no opportunity really to take a break through the whole year. And every game matters just as much as the one before, up until the final series. And, I was sitting, I remember, in my place in Albert Park, or the one I was renting, not the one I'm sitting in now. And, it was miserable. It was like, talk about things that impact your mental health. Melbourne in June is just... And it was bucketing down. It was windy. It was just miserable. And I just didn't know what to do. I was just running through 1,000 things, thinking about how I was going to be able to possibly dealing with the club, or should I do this, or should I just play, or I can't play. I just couldn't work it out. And thankfully, as I said, the thing that stood out in my mind was to pick up the phone and call the club psychologist, Lisa, and basically say, hey, can you just help? Like, I don't know what I need, but I need you to help. And we spoke, as I said, for hours. But the thing was, I had to work out in about 12 hours how to communicate to the football club that their most highly paid asset wasn't available this weekend and likely wouldn't be available the weekend after. And, you extrapolate that and probably wasn't going to be available for a while. And the reason was something that no one can see, that no one can understand, and that, frankly, no one in the AFL had ever spoken about in depth ever in terms of players that were still playing. There'd been players that took time off. There'd players who said, I've got mental health issues, I just need a week, or personal leave or whatever. But no one had said, I've got issues with this, this, and this is why I can't play football. And look, the reason I went down that path is really simple, is because, given the scrutiny that I was under, I didn't want people to think, oh, he's sitting at home as $1 million a year player whinging about the people who are mean to him on Twitter. Well, I wasn't offended if old Big Thumbs over here was giving it to me.
Big Thumbs, BT.
I don't cover other players yet.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Kane didn't in the first little bit either. But we don't
no.
Kane over here.
Kane.
But I needed the fans to know. I needed the club to know. I needed my teammates above and beyond the ones that I'd already spoken with to know that, like, I'm injured. Like, my body is not up to playing AFL football. Now, the reason my body's not up to playing AFL football is not the same as everyone else's. It's not coming from me having a torn calf or a bad shoulder. It's because I haven't slept. I've been under extraordinary stress for multiple years, and I'm unable to manage it. And I need to get on top of these things so that I can sleep, so that I can deal with this stuff, and I can come back and play football. And look, that's not an easy thing to tell the executive of a football club who obviously invested so heavily in you, and particularly when you're in a state like that and you're incredibly vulnerable. So I'm really thankful I had Lisa to help me support me through that. But yeah, it was an incredibly dark period of time in my life.
Your first game for the Bulldogs, round 1, 2015 against West Coast. Your last game for the Bulldogs, round 18 against West Coast. So started and ended your career against the Mighty Eagles.
And the peak in the middle,
Yeah. Ending some careers there in 2016. There was multiple dailies.
A lot of West Coast involvement here.
So the point I make there, the start and end of the Western Bulldogs career and ultimately your AFL career. What's the feeling after that deal gets done? You've spoken a little bit about getting to that point and the support you receive, but I don't know, the day or the moment or whatever it is when, right, you've finished and is it relief or is it anxiety again? Like, oh shit, I'm going to have to deal with the bullshit that comes after that. How do you feel when you call quits and it gets done?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a process, right? Like, I think everyone thinks that you make rash decisions, or someone like me who gave back, $2 and a bit million to the club and moved on at 23 and still had years to run. And it was like, well, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So many people tweeted or said that. And look, that's fine. I don't care. I really don't care what these people think because, they weren't in my shoes. And if there's, one thing I can stand behind as a player who finished early is I did the right thing in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. And I certainly didn't do what I've seen so many players do. And I'm not having to go at other players. I'm saying many players take the cash in the last few years because they're worried about their future in terms of making good money. And, I couldn't do that. I couldn't sit there for 2 years, 2.5 years and just be like, oh, this is great. I'll take a massive paycheck and pretend like I'm not completely destroying every relationship that I have with this place. So, I'd made mention to the club doctor at the end of 2018, and the reason I stopped playing after that West Coast game that you mentioned was because I'd had this really bad back thing that I was dealing with through 18, and actually, funnily enough, had surgery on 2 weeks ago. So, and I'd said to him at the end of 18, in the sort of 19 preseason, so this is probably 3 or 4 months after that game, and was saying, I don't think I want to do it anymore, Zim. And Gary, the bloke with the massive mustache, if you watch the dog play, great man. And I said, I think I'm done. And he goes, what do you mean? Like, he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I said, look, I'm not depressed. I'm not sad. Like, I don't love it anymore. I used to want to play, and I used to want to play all the time. And he goes, look, Tom, I've heard this story too many times. And every time the players come to me when they're out of form, they're injured, they say, I want to give it away. And he says, 6 months later, every single one of them comes back to me in tears going, filled with regret, I wish I'd made a different choice. Because in that moment when they're so sad or miserable or frustrated, you think the world is never going to change. And for me, that wasn't the place that I was in. But I listened to it. I thought it was really great advice. I made it through to probably 3 or 4 months after that. And I was like, no, I'm ready to go. And I walked into the club for the last time, luckily enough to get a retirement speech, which you think is a given, but it's not a given. Like, even great players sometimes, if they don't leave ceremoniously, they don't get the chance.
Yeah, I mean, 60 games. I mean, like, I know you've had a journey, but you played just over 60 games. So I haven't seen too many 60 gamers give a retirement speech. I might add.
And I knew that for a fact. So I think it's very short, very short. And like, I tell people, I saw, Bob Murphy, Dale Morris, Matty, like, these guys give retirement speeches and they talk for 20 minutes and it's amazing. They deserve it. Filled with emotion. Not me. I've been there for 5 minutes. So I said 2 things, right? I said, firstly to everyone in the room, I need you to understand you're the reason I lasted as long as I did, not the reason I'm leaving. And secondarily to the players, if you're thinking about renegotiating your salary, now would be a really good time because you put $2 million back in the cap. I think there's a video out there of this. I think. No, I'm actually probably not.
There is now.
It was, mate. It was. Everyone laughed. Everyone was so nervous going into this thing. I could sense the nerves in the room. And as someone who does a lot of public speaking now, I don't know where I found the wherewithal at that stage early in my speaking career to know what I was doing. But they lost it. I got to walk out of the club, with my future wife and my arm, happy, ready to go. And you'd think it just ends there. Everything's great. But a week later, I watched the boys get absolutely smashed by Freo, and I was sitting at home with a beer going, this is awesome. Bray on Monday is going to be horrible. And then about 3 days after that, I was like, what am I doing with my life? And, people, we talk about mental health all the time. I think one of the great misnomers of this whole thing is, that anxiousness and that desire to do something that many of us don't know how to control. It's not always bad. That moment in time, I felt stressed and anxious because I was like, I need to make something of this. I can't just sit here and I'd earned good money, but I hadn't earned enough money to sit on a beach forever, especially not at the age of 23. So, from that moment on, I dove straight into all of the work that I do now. And, I went through a pandemic just like everyone else where I lost all my work and had to figure things out. wrote a book, got a job, invested in a business or two, and now I am where I am.
Yeah, I mean, you've already sort of reached it for me, but like, if we could put a bow on it, which I understand that everything's an open basket basically, and you can never tie it up. But yeah, what has the transition been like, and what's life right now, for Tom Boyd?
Yeah, so I think the transition, as I said, I probably picked the worst time in human history to leave the AFL.
Yeah.
Where, so I sort of had a pipeline of 6-7 months to really work out what I wanted to do. I went back to play a bit of local footy at the end of 2019. And then I got to the start of 2020 and I'd lined up all of this public speaking work. I wanted to make an impact in the mental health space. It was all looking great. And I lost every gig that I had, which would have been 40 or 50 at this stage in a day. Wow. All of it was good. And again, I'm not here to ask for sympathy or pity. I didn't need the money was going to be fine. As I said, I made really good money playing footy. I was very lucky in that case. But the structure was something that I desperately wanted. It was something that I sort of grappled with at the end of 19 without that, get up and go to work thing, which, to be frank, when you leave football, you've been told since you were 5 years old where to be and what to do in every moment for the last whatever amount of years, which for me was 18. And so all of a sudden I had all this autonomy and choice, and I was trying to work out what that was going to be filled with, and I filled it, and then it was gone. And look, I think I learned two things when the pandemic hit around the work piece. The first was, I don't think I was quite done with the football thing, and so I wanted to, really dive back into what had happened and why it's happened so I could move on properly. And that's when I wrote the book, Nowhere to Hide, which came out last year. And, that was a 2.5 year process where I wrote it myself, and then I, pitch it to the publisher and go back and write it again myself, and with some help from an editor. And it was just an amazingly difficult but enjoyable experience in the sort of sickest of ways. And then the other thing was that the thing that I missed most, which was probably obvious now looking back, was I needed a home base. Like I needed somewhere to go where I knew the people that were there. We were there for the same reasons, because I'd had that every single day of every moment of my life since I was 5. And now I had home with my wife, and then I had nothing. So if I was doing speaking work, I was out on the road by myself. I was organizing myself. I was invoicing myself. Everything was done by myself. And so that's when I actually ended up joining the business that I invested in and I'm a part of in Everperform, which is essentially champion data for the workplace. We're a performance company that works with accounting firms around the country. And it's been an incredible place for me to learn and grow and meet new people and do the speaking stuff and find a balance between the two. So this year will be the biggest one that I've had yet. I'll probably tick close to 85 or 90 speaking engagements for the year. The book, as I said, came out. I'm an ambassador for WorkSafe, for Lifeline and the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation, do the work with Everperform, and try and find the best of all of it, which is, it's an incredible life that I get to lead.
Last question. Not that I keep saying, not that I sort of understand exactly what you're talking about, but talking about speaking and specifically around mental health and difficult things to speak about, where you've got to be vulnerable and you've got to perhaps show a side that you may not show publicly often. If you're doing something like 90 speaking gigs a year, just speaking honestly, is that fatiguing? I can imagine that would be hard.
Yeah. I mean, they're all different muscles that I find that sort of apply to the different work that I do. And I'd be remiss of me to mention I'm also a father and got married.
That should be top of the list, the father.
Best for last is the way I do
That's
this.
correct.
Sorry, Anna and Ronnie. But yeah, I mean, it depends. I think at times it really depends how you approach these events. And there's a certain, I think, demographic of people who really take it upon themselves to pour out every negative moment of their life in the hope that it will help people. Look, it's not to say that it does not helpful. It's certainly it's not quite the way that I go about it. I think to the conversation we've had today, the lesson of my life is pretty simple, I think, for other people, which is, I had everything, absolutely everything you could ask for from a very young age around individual success, team success, adulation, money, fame, if you want to call it that, in the league. I even had the family stuff sorted on the side with my future wife and all that stuff looked perfect, and yet still I managed to find myself in a really diabolical and quite desperate period of time in my life. And the lesson is, hey, if someone as lucky and entitled as me can really struggle with this stuff, well, why wouldn't that be the same for anyone else who's got a set of life circumstances that are vastly different and perhaps more difficult? So that's the way I approach it. There's certainly moments in time where I have a lot of difficult conversations with a lot of individuals, and I've spoken from the C-suite of some of the multinational companies here in Melbourne or around the country, all the way out into tiny little country clubs in the far-reaching parts of Victoria and beyond. And no matter where you go, the stories are the same. We've lost someone. I've struggled. My friends struggled. We don't know what to do about a club. But there's a lot of people that are really, having challenging times. We don't know what to do about our business. And I think it's a really humbling thing for me to understand just the far-reaching nature of this topic and how difficult it is for people to fix, because it's not a simple, thing to go after and try and change. So, I've learned to try and find the balance between the I suppose the satisfaction and ideally the impact, as well as the individual journey and struggle that it might involve doing these gigs myself.
It's been a great chat. We aren't quite finished. Social media to follow this, which is not social, Scotial. I mean, tell you what, X with Elon Musk has got something coming up alongside here. Social media. This is the questions from the people for you, Tom, not just Dan and I. But if you have enjoyed Tom's chat, I would encourage you to seek Tom out on any of the channels on social media. Get in touch with him. Go and read his book, which I will be doing. Have not done. I will be doing. Off the back.
Big words, mate. I'm still a ex-footballer,
Yeah, don't worry. I can write too, so we can judge it at the end of the time.
I bet big font.
Yeah, mate. Like, I absolutely.
How many pictures are in it?
No pictures. That costs more, mate.
It's a well-written book from all regards. So if you have enjoyed Tom, make sure you do, because I think it's pretty special, his story. Now, let's finish off with social media. This is where the people get asked the questions, Tom. Let's go. Jake Nash _.
How does it feel to be part of one of the all-time great BT calls?
I would say the great BT call. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else has been sworn at us on radio. I love it. I love it. Look, and, talking about staying relevant, everyone, all the older people go, oh, but the people won't know who you are into the future. So you can't just do this stuff forever. Every year, a new round of 12-year-olds go and message me on Facebook and Instagram and tag me and all this stuff going, oh, BT's commentary. So I might be relevant into perpetuity just based on that one call. So thank you, Brian.
Mine needs a little clip on the way to go. John _Dawson.
Should 1st to 5-year players not get more than $500,000 a year?
Oh, no. What are you talking about? I'm the worst guy to ask that question. Go ask a rookie, and then you'll make him feel better.
Ask Scully. I'd like $500,000 a year. Seb Vanders.
How do you feel about the pressure on Harley Reid?
I met him or saw him very close to me. We did a gig up at his club. Look, I think I think the requirement of 18-year-olds to understand the macro trends of the trade period and the clubs that are involved in it is just crazy. It sounds like to me, from what I've heard from him, he's just a country footy kid, and ideally those guys thrive in the AFL. So we'll see what the pressure's like next year. That's when it all really counts.
Now, this is relevant to our podcast here at BackChat. One of our co-hosts, Hamish Brayshaw, knocked off 100 chicken nuggets last night, and one of the great, I would say, human acts of
performances in history.
Yeah. So Taz _Kai asked,
could you eat 100 chicken nuggets
in one
No.
sitting?
I mean, look, it depends. It takes some preparation, I think.
Yeah, Hamish just rolled in after work and just knocked off 100 as easy as you like.
He had 2 breakfast wraps for lunch.
He won the Sandover medal, best footballer in Western Australia 2 months ago, and he's knocked off 100. No worries. Scotty doesn't know.
Does the AFL handle mental health issues better for a new player, and what else can be done?
Oh, that's a long answer.
Yeah. Let me do it in very, very quick terms. The AFL set the policy. The clubs look after the experience of players. The more we can more tools we can give our players to deal with this stuff, the better. But it's never going to be easy playing AFL football. It's an advertising driven industry, which means attention. It means vitriol. It means bums on seats and eyes on screens. So tools teach them how to fish.
#Evelyn.
Have you watched the Beckham doco?
I've watched half of it.
Great. So, thoughts on the impact of the red card and how that's affected his mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. Like, that is nuclear version of what I went through. By the way, not a red card from where I was.
That guy dove so hard.
Yeah, and the because where is he from? He's from Spain or something. But he said it wasn't a red card either. So happy days.
Which makes it worse, probably.
Yeah,
totally.
The last but not least, the Eggman.
Yeah, Tappy95. How does Tom Boyd like his eggs? Sincerely, the Eggman.
That's a good question. I'm a big scrambled egg man, like a quality with a bit of chorizo, and I like cooking at home, so anything I can sort of make it interesting. Scrambled eggs for me.
Mate, Tommy Boyd, we've really appreciated your time. We can hear a little kid in the background, and Dan and I know the troubles. Fathers of two sitting right here, mate. So we thank you for your time. A big
Two
shout
different
out
sets of kids, by the way.
We're not fathers together. We do have 2 children each. Fleet Network powering the podcast this year. Swimply, Whippersnapper Whiskey, Margaret River Roasting Co., Blue Bet, Shelter Brewing Co., Leadable Cameras, Mumba Digital, Movember through November, and everything you can find backchatstudios.com.au. Did you have fun, mate? We enjoyed having you.
Oh, mate, look at you boys. You've got 75 different sponsors. We're making it big time. Well done. Great work, lads. Look, I love what you're doing. I just need to hear a different set of opinions than the ones that I hear every day in the media. If I can possibly do that and keep doing what you're doing. And, sounds like some exciting stuff.